Right now, though, I want to return to the story of soaring house prices, because I do appreciate some of the messages that have come in and said it's all about supply and demand, and, because we've been living under difficult conditions for the last couple of years, supply has been low and demand may be high. But even so, I'm struggling with the notion that house prices have gone up more than 10% over the last 12 months. That's the fastest growth rate in 15 years. Average price of a UK home is a record high, £254,822. That's up nearly £24,000 year on year. Just amazing. So that means that prices are 16% higher than before the pandemic struck in 2022, early 2022, 22 months ago. An outcome few economists would have anticipated. I'm not surprised by that. What about the property gurus, though? Were they anticipating it? Henry Pryor, property expert, joins me on the line now. Good day to you, Henry.
Matthew, a very good day to you. Happy Christmas.
And Happy Christmas, Happy New Year as well. Has this come as a surprise? Obviously you've been tracking it, so you'll know this. The notion that house prices have gone up so much in the last year, was that a surprise?
Well, thank goodness this is radio, because I am blushing on behalf of myself and my colleagues, my professional colleagues. No, you're absolutely right. None of us saw this coming, with one exception. There was a city institution who stuck their necks out, and they were right ahead of the first lockdowns in 2020. But, Matthew, there's been huge changes, not just to finances in this country, but also to the way we live, the way we want to live, and therefore pressures on different demands. Phil and Kirsty, as we know, week after week, talk about location. What's changed over the last 18 months is where that location is. People want more from their homes. They want their homes to be able to be flexible, to be able to provide homeschooling, because we've all learned about looking after our kids and educating them now at home rather than when they can't go to school. We want to work from home, so we need decent full fibre broadband in order to be able to connect up with our workplaces. We need our homes to have that outside space, because obviously being locked down, as many people learned very painfully, although not everybody famously, without the ability to have some sort of outside space was incredibly difficult, frustrating and depressing. So we want more from our homes, and as a result of that, we've seen changes in demand, and we've seen shifts in what people want. We've seen an expansion of commuter belts. London famously has that zones 1, 2, 3, 4, and then out to the outside the M25, out into the shires. But most of the towns and cities around the UK also have something similar. And we've seen that if people aren't having to go into work 5 days a week, then they can afford to extend that commute.
You just answered, because I was sitting here thinking, I'm hearing everything you're saying, and the list of things that people want all cost money. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is, I want, yep, at a time when I haven't got. How is it financed? And you've just explained it. It's the savings of not getting on our terrible railways and such like. Bingo, I've got it. Right.
It's also very important to understand, whilst lots of listeners have been calling, texting, emailing in, talking to us about how important supply and demand is in the equation. It's one of the fundamental errors that people make. Of course, physical supply and physical demand is important, as it is with every other commodity, but it's the ability for people to be able to borrow money to be able to buy these assets. You can't borrow money, or you shouldn't borrow money to buy stocks and shares, for example. But when it comes to houses, we do. And we are living in record 360-year low when it comes to the cost of borrowing. And if you're fortunate enough to be able to borrow money, interest rates have just gone up slightly. Now 0.5%. Remember, back after the credit crunch, they were in 2007. They were 5%, and
some of us can remember when they were nearly 20.
Some of us wouldn't like to talk about the fact that we can remember when they were 15 or 20%. But the important thing for people to remember is that money, as a result of quantitative easing, as a result of what was put in place after the credit crunch, all those years ago, still remains. And it means that if you are able to qualify to get a mortgage, it is incredibly easy, it's very cheap, and they are being very generous with the amounts they lend. And as a result, people are using that additional money to compete with one another for a finite resource, and that's what's driving prices up.
Tell me about London, because I noticed in one of the papers today it was saying that Taunton has become a property hotspot, and I've spent a lot of time in the West Country, and all my friends down there just say there's a London invasion going on. If it's not, it's mainly second homers, I have to say, but if there's been any shift, it's actually people now getting out of plague-ridden cities for the healthy countryside. Is that distorting the market at all? Because Londoners, obviously, their homes are worth, normally, I suppose, proportionally, much more than perhaps other regional areas.
Westminster house prices, Matthew, are down 7% year on year, compared to Taunton, as you say, which came out at the top of this list from one of the big mortgage lenders this morning, where house prices over the last 12 months are up by over 20%. And part of this is due to what we were talking about a moment ago, this race for space, as it's been dubbed, this ability for people to be able to move away from their anchor points, where perhaps their place of work or where their family and friends are, because they don't have to be there 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. And this, coupled with forgive me, I'm going to be desperately politically correct here and just say the madness of the stamp duty holiday that was introduced at a time when we were, I have to admit, all very nervous of what was going to happen. But the stamp duty holiday poured money onto the flames of an already very hot housing market. The stamp duty holiday gave people a maximum of somewhere in the order of £25,000 to £30,000, depending on how much they were spending, that they didn't have to pay to the government. And obviously, as a result of that, they were able to add that saving to the amount of money that they were using to bid to compete for your friends' houses down in the West Country. But it's been the same across the whole of the UK. If you look at places like Bradford or Bolton, house prices in Bolton up £30,000 over the last 12 months. Just extraordinary. Are we going to see this going on?
Well, I was going to say the $64 million question is, how long is this going to go on for? I mean, really?
Well, you rightly pointed out at the top of this piece, only a complete muppet would try and predict house prices. And here I go with my best Kermit impression. House prices will, through 2022, I suspect, continue to increase, although not at the rates we've seen, possibly a maximum of 5% in some fortunate hotspots. But it does mean that on the reverse side, that other side of the coin, and again, something we talk about on LBC very regularly, of course, first-time buyers are going to continue to struggle to get onto the housing ladder, and those who've been completely left behind, who aren't able to afford to buy or to rent something, and who are relying on social housing, what we used to call council housing, they are the people who are going to be the principal sufferers, the major sufferers through the coming 12 months, and I'm afraid we're probably going to talk about it, and quite rightly so, in the weeks and months to come.
It's a pretty bleak picture out there.
It depends, winners or losers. Depends if you own a house. This is all tax-free money as long as it's your principal residence. If you want to buy a house or you aspire to home ownership, that is a very different kettle of fish.
Would you like to see more or less government meddling in the market? I mean, I'm just thinking.
Please, God, yes. We want less meddling. We've had 22 housing ministers, Matthew, since the year 2000. And as a result, we've almost had more political appointments than we've built new homes. Fewer homes, please.
OK, now, what about, there's something else, we sort of glibly went over it, but I'm mindful of the fact there could be a whole generation, I'm actually looking at my producer through the glass window, who may not be aware of just how tight things got in the early 90s, because we've just had, as you said, this tiny increase in interest rates, which I'd like to think for most people with a mortgage, they can soak that up. It's going to be okay. But God forbid it ever were to happen again, but we are looking at an inflationary economy as a picture, and interest rates are often used to control inflation. There is a possibility, however remote, that we might end up going back to the early 90s when interest rates, as you said, were 15, 20%, and people were throwing away their keys to their house and walking away. It was a disaster zone, really. I mean, I know people that got into all sorts of mess from it. And the other day, I think day before yesterday, I was reporting on a new mortgage lender offering 8 times salary, which is exactly the kind of conditions that led to the overheating in the first place.
Well, those are the sort of headlines that you were quite rightly reporting on yesterday, which we last saw before an institution called Northern Rock. Many listeners, particularly your producer, too young to know the name Northern Rock, I'm sure. But that was the start of the credit crunch back in 2007. Queues of people trying to take their money out of banks. It's a very frightening experience, and one that doesn't, thank goodness, happen that often. But if predicting house prices was a rash pastime, then, here goes with something that's even more ridiculous. More chance, I suspect, Matthew, of finding Elvis alive on the moon than there will be of interest rates going back to the sorts of rates that old fuddy-duddies like you and I can recall back in the 1980s.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right.
But here's the reason why it doesn't really matter if they do. 75% of mortgage borrowers are on fixed-rate mortgages. So it's no longer the tool it once was. The Bank of England doesn't have the ability to put a brake on house prices in the way they once did. And that's why we now see different levers being applied, both positively and negatively. And interest rates, although obviously very important to business and to savers in particular, much less relevant to the housing market and to house prices per se today.
God, that's quite nice to end on a reassuring note there, Henry. I'm really indebted to you. Henry Pryor there, property expert. We hear him all the time on LBC, and you can understand why. Crystal clear analysis of a really extraordinary situation. House prices at record highs.